What's going on, guys? Jacob here. Welcome back to Robski Football. And of course, it is Friday. The weekend is here and it's time for another preview and predict video. This time around, game week 36. Before we head into it, obviously, let's recap quickly on the ongoings that happened last week. From a scoring prediction perspective, I had a poor weekend of it. To list a few, I had West Ham going away to Brentford, winning 2-1. Of course, they came away there with a 3-0 defeat at the hands of Brentford. Man United Liverpool, I got that scoreline right, 3-2, which is obviously a good result for Man United, securing Champions League football for next season. And then what we've got Villa versus Spurs. I didn't listen to De Zerbi about winning the last 5 games of the season, but I probably should have. Villa obviously had one eye on their Europa League semi-final against Forest, and it showed even in the first 10-20 minutes. Spurs just, they showed up, which we haven't seen, for the majority of their season in the Premier League, and they did a good job to get that away win. But yeah, obviously the last game of the previous game week, Everton versus City. What a game that was. Definitely a contender for game of the season. Obviously a 3-3 draw it ended up, but Everton were very unlucky to drop 2 points at the end of the day, and City were very lucky to get 1 point, given the context of the game. But nevertheless, we're jumping in straight into game week 36. We start early on Saturday with a big fixture, actually. Liverpool versus Chelsea. Obviously, both teams not having the season that they would have hoped for. Liverpool looking again, similar to United, to secure Champions League football, which they have got that buffer of around, I believe, 6 or 7 points now. So they're there or thereabouts, but they would like to get a win against Chelsea, I'm sure, just to secure that qualification. I am going to go with Liverpool to win in this one, 2-1. I think, given the Chelsea performance that we saw against Forest, Forest coming away with a surprising victory, to say the least. But Chelsea were very, very poor. They've lost the last 5. Liverpool, like I said, they're 6 points ahead of Bournemouth, who I think are in that 6th spot right now, which is that buffer. So they need to get that 3 points just to secure Champions League football. But that being said, I do expect a much better Chelsea performance. It can't get any worse than what we saw against Forest at home on Monday. Brighton versus Wolves. Now, Brighton, obviously, Fabian Hürzeler has signed a new deal, keeping him at the club for an extended time. Obviously, they've also got their eyes in for Europe next season, whether that be the Europa League or the Conference League, remains to be seen. Wolves, on the other hand, got a surprising point against Sunderland. I thought Sunderland would get that win, but obviously, given the context of what happened with Dan Ballard getting that red card, changing the shift of the game, Wolves did manage to pull a point out there. Obviously, news coming out today, Joao Gomez looks like he's on the way to Atletico Madrid to partner up with Simeone over there. And I think, he is a well-deserved move on his part. Definitely probably going to see his brighter side in a Atletico Madrid shirt. But this one, I think Brighton, they've been very good probably since the turn of the year, in part. And Wolves, on the other hand, they don't have anything to play for. It's going to be very hard for Rob Edwards to motivate his team to get to that standard again. So I'm going to go for a 3-0 victory to Brighton for this one. On to Fulham versus Bournemouth. Now, Fulham were just catastrophically poor against Arsenal at the Emirates. Arsenal did very well, especially in that first half. Bukayo Saka coming back from a long period out, but he looks like he's firing on all cylinders now, going into the last few games of the season in the league, but also obviously getting into the Champions League final. He's come at the right time, and even for Thomas Tuchel and the England team ahead of the World Cup. Bournemouth, on the other hand, lost the last 5. The last 5 they're unbeaten, I should say. So they're looking very good, and also they're looking to try and get a hold of a European place in whichever competition that'll be in. It remains to be seen. However, I did hear a stat, I believe earlier today or yesterday, that Fulham have over the last 2 or 3 seasons not won a game in May. So I'm going to follow that trend, and I'm going to go for Fulham 1, Bournemouth 2. I just think Bournemouth, going forward, and probably as a team as a whole, they seem a lot more collective, but going forward, they have a lot of talent. I mean, Ryan, I've spoken about him in group chats. I've spoken about him, I feel, on these preview and predict videos since I started them. He's looking like a great buy, 19 years of age, and he scored again at the weekend as well. So yeah, Bournemouth to get the 3 points away at Fulham in that one. Sunderland versus Man United. Now, I mean, Sunderland versus Man United, as a United fan, I wouldn't have wanted this game to be, to come at any other time. If this was a game that was being played in January, February, coming off the back of that winter period, the busy period, of course, Man United at that time would have needed the points to try and get up that table and obviously match their aspirations and goals to get to the Champions League, to put us back where we belong. This game, I feel like, comes at a right time. But that being said, reports of Mateus Cunha being rested, or at least the Brazilian Federation have requested that he be rested before the World Cup. So we shall see if we do see him. That being said, United are obviously got Champions League qualification secure now. So will we see a United team that, put their foot off the gas a little bit? You know what? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think Man United will win against Sunderland away. I think we'll see probably a little bit more of a drab version of United, given the psychological, relaxing that I'm sure is going to happen in their heads now. Again, Sunderland, I thought they would get their 3 points against Wolves, not to be. Though obviously those guys seem like they've done a great job, regardless throughout the whole season. So this is kind of just seeing the season out now. That being said, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw in this game. Not that I think United will, obviously not go out to not win. But at the same time, I think Sunderland is always a tough place to go. United, on the other hand, we make it very tough for ourselves, So again, I'm glad this game is happening now rather than earlier in the season, which would have been a lot of a much more trickier proposition on the face of it. Now, Man City versus Brentford, of course, City playing in that absolute blinder of a game, 3-3 versus Everton. They could have had it. They could have had it won in the first half, but Everton came out the blocks the second half, absolutely run rampant over City, and it showed us a fragility of that City team that I didn't think would be possible with how Pep Guardiola, with how we know him to be, with how we know he sets up his teams, especially going into these run-ins, towards a title charge. That being said, Brentford got a surprising victory against West Ham. I think West Ham, and I'll talk about them when we get to that fixture, but they were very unlucky. But Brentford took their chances, which in this league especially, you don't get many chances, so you've got to take them. That being said, I do think City bounce back with this game. I do think they'll have too much for Brentford. That being said, I don't think Brentford will leave the Etihad without scoring a goal. As I think, with Damsgaard, with Kevin Schade, with, of course, Igor Thiago, I think they've got too much firepower and, not too much firepower, but, firepower to the extent where they will cause trouble for, a Mark Gahey or a Kushinov that we saw, a Tierno Barry and Beto cause them on Monday night. So with that being said, I am going to give Man City this one and predict a 3-1 victory for them. Quickly onto Burnley versus Aston Villa. Now, Burnley obviously outclassed against Leeds last time out, 3-0 defeat for them. Obviously, they're down and out and have been for a couple of weeks now. Villa, on the other hand, did make it through against Forest at home into the Europa League final. That being said, Villa themselves, similar to Liverpool, they're on the same points. They need just a win or a win and another draw just to get them secure for Champions League qualification, which obviously if they do win the Europa League and get within the top 5, that could open up an extra spot for the Champions League. So that'll be interesting to see. again, I think Villa, whichever starting 11 they put out, whichever attacking lineup they put forward, whether it be Abraham or Ollie Watkins, I do think they'll have too much up front for Burnley, which is why I'm going to go for 2-0 away win for Villa. Crystal Palace versus Everton. Obviously, Crystal Palace doing their job in the Conference League semi-final. They got through against Fiorentina and against Shakhtar Donetsk, and they're through to a Conference League final. Obviously, it's the leaving party for Oliver Glasner before he departs Crystal Palace, and again, they're coming against an Everton side which they didn't win. They haven't won in their last 4 games, although they have shown very good signs, especially in their attacking play and threatening play with Dewsbury Hall, Tierno Barry, Beto. Iliman Ndiaye, I would say I was very surprised with his performance. I didn't really kind of see too much from him over the last few weeks, and especially that City game. That being said, the only thing in my mind piecing these two together, or separating these two together, I should say, is the Crystal Palace. Is Crystal Palace playing on Thursday night? The turnaround of that into the weekend. I just think it's it's a lot to ask Oliver Glasner and his players to turn up and get 3 points in this game. And I think Everton have, despite their results, shown a great deal of quality going forward. So I am going to go for a cheeky 2-1 away win for Everton on this one. Forest against Newcastle. Forest obviously got knocked out against Villa. They looked pretty poor, or at least I think more so the occasion just hit them and they just didn't have the experience throughout the squad, and especially missing Morgan Gibbs-White after that horrific head injury against Robert Sanchez in the Chelsea game. They were without their captain in that one, which was a huge blow on the grand scheme of things. And then on the Newcastle side, I think they're just in salvage mode. Eddie Howe and his boys, I think, they obviously realise they've had a terrible season. In general, probably not hit the heights at all of what the fans were expecting, what the ownership were expecting, all the players themselves. And, but that being said, we saw them, last time out doing a good job against Brighton. I had it down as a draw, 2-2 draw. Expected a lot more from Brighton, but again, I always say St James's Park is a very tough place to go. So with this one, Newcastle against Forest, I do think it's going to be a pretty entertaining game. Both teams don't have anything. Well, obviously Forest need a few more points just to guarantee safety, but I do think they've got, compared to the other teams, West Ham and Tottenham, they're in a lot better of shape than those two at this current time. So I am going to go for a 2-2 draw in this one. Obviously, West Ham versus Arsenal, many connotations to this one. I mean, at either end of the table. West Ham, despite losing 3-0 against Brentford, I think they were pretty unlucky with the chances that they had. I think they hit the bar or the post 2 or 3 times throughout the game, and we've seen it in past games that they do have that quality up front. But it goes to the same thing every time. In the Premier League, you've got to take your chances. So on the other hand, with Arsenal, I mean, what more can I say? They did their job against Atletico Madrid. They're through to the Champions League final. Given the schedule that they have, but given the importance of this fixture, I expect Bukayo Saka to start and maybe be brought off at the half time or second half, early in the second half. But I do think he'll probably have a part to play in this game. I mean, as much as I would like to say West Ham get something from this, and I do think they'll get at least a goal, I do think Arsenal, for all intents and purposes, at the back, throughout midfield, up front, especially now, last few weeks up front, they've seen a lot more threatening, a lot more put together with Saka and Gyökeres linking up nicely. So that's why I'm going to go for a 2-1 win to Arsenal away from home at the London Stadium. And then to round us off is Spurs versus Leeds United. Now, like I just said earlier in the video, Spurs are a team where I thought they were down and out, even with De Zerbi's appointment. That being said, I'm not surprised that De Zerbi's managed to instill a bit of faith into the team and to show them, you've got the quality. We should not be in this position in the first place, but you've got the quality to get us out of this predicament. With that being said, I think Leeds will not obviously roll over. They've got a part to play themselves in their own safety. I think this will be a similar game to Everton versus City, where both teams, for one reason or another, are going to show up. There's going to be goals in this game. I think, given what we've seen of Spurs, yes, with De Zerbi, it's changed a bit from the defensive side of things, but I think Leeds, against like they did against Man United at Old Trafford, I think they will cause Spurs a lot of problems given the attacking talent they've got with Okafor and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, for example. That being said, I am going to follow De Zerbi in what he said all along, is that they're going to win the last 5 games of the season, but I don't think it's going to be easy, and I'm going to go for Spurs 3, Leeds United 2. So there we go, guys. A quick fire preview and predict for game week 36. Comment below, give a like to the video. Let me know who your team is. Let me know what you think these scores are going to be for this weekend. I am going to come back early next week with a Michael Carrick Man United video and see how this summer could shape up in terms of going, transfer going-ons with ins and outs, how things should be looking from a tactical perspective for next season. And if not Michael Carrick, then who? Because, of course, at this moment in time, as a United fan, we're a bit in the dark now. We've got the Champions League qualification. He's done what he needs to do. And at the end of the day, all we have to wait for is that contract and that announcement from Man United to say he's signed on for the next season. But until then, we're in the dark. So I'm going to be bringing a video on Monday or Tuesday next week, going into detail about that, and I can't wait to bring that to you. But other than that, hope you guys enjoy the Premier League weekend. I'm sure it's going to be another great weekend of football with a few surprising results. And that is all for me today. I will see you next time.